Today I'm here to talk about how to look for work in Switzerland. I want to thank you for taking the time to join today. I really appreciate it. I picked up your questions and I will answer them during this session. It's important to me. So what I want to do is basically start launching this live Facebook every month with a different career topic that's of interest to you. And this month it's actually how to look for work in Switzerland, because I think a lot of you are wondering what's the process, what the application should be like, all these kinds of things. So I want to cover the topic basically by talking about the context, what's Switzerland like, what is it like as a country, then giving you some tips about the job search itself, a lot of questions around basically when you're foreign, which I can understand. And then I'll talk about the frontalier status, which is really working in a country and living in another country, which could be of interest to you at this stage. So if you have any questions during the sessions, I don't want to make it too formal. If I see a question pop up online, I'll just answer the question at that time. And you will also have the replay available on my page. And you are welcome to ask questions also afterwards, and I will keep replying. So basically, to get started about how to look for work in Switzerland, I want to talk about the notion of culture in Switzerland, because I think it's important if you're foreign to understand what it's like as a country, what you're dealing with basically. I think it's just as important as the application itself. So to give you some basics on the culture, basically what's important to understand in Switzerland is that in terms of languages, you definitely have different languages. And if you're in Zurich, the Swiss German is very important. If you're in Geneva or Lausanne, the French is important. And that's something probably expats underestimate at the beginning. In most countries, you're okay with one language, English, probably most of the time. I'm thinking the UK, the US, Canada. Canada also has French, but if you speak English, you could probably get by, which is not necessarily the case in Switzerland. I think nowadays 3 languages is basically average. So if you have just one language, you're already a little bit short in terms of skills. So that's something I think people need to understand. I mean, basically 64% of the population in Switzerland speak German, Swiss German. So that's big news. And that's important. In terms of culture, I wanted to mention a few things as well, which are important. The first one, and you may know this already, but I figure I put it in my live session today. Switzerland is not part of the EU, so it is a complexity of its own, because basically that means asking for a work permit. There's also some implications if you're doing business, the import-export, for example. So there's a process by which you have to apply for certain things that you wouldn't have to if you were part of Europe, if Switzerland was part of Europe. So that creates an extra thing that people have to deal with. The other thing is also the cultural difference in terms of the canton, it's called. So basically the canton manages their own politics and economy locally. So that means if you're changing canton, so for example, you're going from Geneva to Lausanne, that means everything changes as well. Your process for applying for a permit will change, or creating a business. You need to register in and out of the canton. So all these things are really Swiss specifics, and for someone foreign, it's not something that's necessarily coming to mind. The other thing about the culture is really the principles of punctuality and rigor, and also humility. So sometimes people come from abroad and they don't really understand the culture. So in the US, for example, something that would be viewed as a plus, for example, if you're really sure of yourself, if you're a go-getter, technically it's a plus. In Switzerland, it might play a little bit against you. People want to see that you know your stuff, you're an expert, but you're not someone who's so much a go-getter. It's not necessarily seen as positive here. So working really on the right approach is important. Something that worked in a country very well for you for many years might not work in Switzerland, because the process to sell yourself is a little bit different. So that's just something I also wanted to make sure. The other thing is the regional attachment. So what I mean by regional attachment is that every canton has their own rules. So that means that people feel really close to their own rules. They understand, for example, in the Swiss German part, that there are certain rules that you have to abide by, and people want you to follow these rules. The same as Geneva or Lausanne or wherever you're going. So you need to be aware of these rules and you need to follow them. So there's an adaptation that you would not have to do necessarily if you move to another country, because it's the same everywhere. But here again, the canton is becoming important. And also what I find with expats is that sometimes they're not trying hard enough to fit in the community. So, you know, you come, you work for a multinational and you end up doing work home, and you don't really understand the community, the local market. So that's something that will bring you value in the long run, because if you were to lose that job, you need to have a network, a community network you can basically speak to and ask questions to. So probably that's underestimated. So if you're working right now, you have a job and you haven't really been involved in the local community, my advice would be to start really thinking about attending local events and be part of that. Because that way you can really think longer term in terms of your career potential, and have also some people you can exchange with in provision of a career change. So just to give you a few figures, I thought some of you may be interested. Switzerland is doing well employment-wise compared to other countries, especially in Europe right now. However, there is, depending on where you are, there are some cantons that have a bit of a higher unemployment rate than others. So for example, if you're in Neuchâtel, the unemployment rate is higher than in Zurich, for example, of Geneva. Geneva is probably average when I looked at the figures. So you're not in a market where there's tons of positions available, but you're not in a market where it's the hardest, which would be Neuchâtel. So the average unemployment is 3.2%, and these figures are available on the SECEO website. So SECO is basically the economy in Switzerland. You're welcome to look at it, and I can send you the link if you want. In terms of what is the type of market that you have in Switzerland, basically it's a services type of market with 73.8% services. So that means that most companies in Switzerland are providing services to others. So you have a lot of business to business, for example, a lot of medium-sized businesses. So when people come, you know, and maybe they think you have a lot of multinationals available, it's the case. We do have some multinationals in Switzerland, but you also have a lot of small businesses. So that's also something maybe to tap into if you're looking for work, not just the big multinationals, but the local. Again, I'm going back to that local market that people sometimes underestimate. And that's not really available to you from the get-go because you don't speak the local language. So you're already separating yourself from this local market, which is probably, in my view, the richest in terms of opportunities. So that's something to keep in mind, a services type of market. In terms of employment, I also wanted to share with you some of the basics to understand if you're looking for work. Basically, there's no minimum wage, so it's not something that you can negotiate from the get-go saying I want the minimum wage. You will have to talk to the employer that's interested in you and negotiate that with the person. So there's not a rule that says this is the minimum wage. It was at some point a topic of discussion, but I think people voted against it. So it's not in the program right now to change that. There's also something I would encourage you to read called the Swiss Code of Obligations. If you type on Google, it will give you basically all the articles about Swiss employment contractual rules. So things that you would want to know if you're considering work here. For example, how many hours do people work per week? You know, what's the notification period? How much holidays do I get or time off, and all these things that you're curious about if you're considering working in a country. So the Code of Obligations will state that clearly for you, and it's something that employers go by. So it's called the Code of Obligations, and it's a few articles only, I think 28 or 30 articles, and it covers very much employment contractual relationships in Switzerland. So that's just a side note for you. A website I encourage you to visit is the admin.ch website. This is where human resources professionals go to get information on Swiss laws and employment law. So this is where you can find a lot of information. So now to go a little bit more about the sectors in Romandie. So I'm talking now about the French-speaking part of Switzerland, which is where I'm based. So this is where I have the most information. But again, I can also speak for the Zurich part to some extent. So in the French-Swiss part of Switzerland, basically the areas where you would be able to find positions. You have a huge sector which is the health and social work, that people, again, it's very much local, so the local language would be a plus. But that's a huge recruitment area in Geneva, at least. So social associations, you know, NGOs, all those kinds of things. Then the other sector, which I just mentioned, which is also interesting, is basically anything B2B, so business to business. If you're selling services, for example, to companies, you have a lot of these small businesses in Geneva. The other one is banking and finance, which is still a big hub for jobs in Geneva. So they're looking for skilled employees, very specific in this sector. You can find jobs there. Also, another area which is basically around the whole Lac Léman, it's basically schools. So you have a lot of schools, whether it's private schools, universities. The EPFL is present in Switzerland. It's the big schools for engineering and present in Lausanne. Then you have Webster University. You have the IMD also in Lausanne, which is really, really famous. So a lot of big schools. It's a huge education hub also in the French part. Tourism is still very much important. Public administration, you have a lot of positions. Again, these require sometimes there's a permit situation and you have to be local. So that depends on the positions. International organizations, but I will talk about international organizations because I think people are interested in them, but it's quite a very particular profile that you need to have in international organizations. Diplomacy, you know, international knowledge about topics around development and policies and things like that. I see questions, so I'm happy to answer. So I have a question from Prashi saying how to apply for IT consulting jobs. That's a very good question. So consulting jobs are basically anywhere where you would have a big companies, basically big hubs. A lot of small businesses also recruit IT. It's basically a in-demand type of sector, also IT. The thing is the work permit. So as long as you have the right work permit and you're already based in Switzerland, it's easier. If you come from abroad, I think you still have a chance to get a permit if you're really specialist in your trade. If you're a senior consultant and you're very good in one specific thing, the organization or the startup might be interested in sponsoring you to get the permit, but they would have to prove there's no local workers available to do the work. So that's why I'm saying it has to be very technical, because I can't imagine they would have someone come from abroad when you already have people locally. Consulting, it's really something maybe that can be played with. Maybe you know a certain country where the business is trying to develop, and you have this country knowledge that you would bring to the organization, or a specific program that they're trying to implement. So maybe you can play with that, but that would be probably hidden market also, is to try to find the IT consulting firms that would be interested in your services, but probably possible. How to apply in English speaking jobs, because I know English and no other language. It's what I was saying earlier. If you just have English, it's already a bit short, because it's a country where languages are really in demand. So, so much more competitive for people who only speak one language. I would repeat what I just said, is probably the key here would be maybe you have a specific skill in a country in terms of business development, or specific skill, specific IT knowledge that not many people have. But again, the hidden market would be my provision there, is to try to tap into the consulting firms in the area of Switzerland that you target, and just contact them directly, not look at job boards at this stage. Okay, I have a question from Alexander. What could be, for me as a graduate engineer, the most efficient strategy to find a job in Switzerland, Lac Léman region, if I do not have work experience, personal network in Switzerland? So that was a question I think I received also today. Basically, when you have no experience, so I had this question that was asked, if I have no experience and no network, you have to start somewhere. So experience is something that you build up. You can start with an internship, for example. You can start volunteering your services. I think the key here is to be active. So you need to show that you're putting efforts into your job search and that you're doing something. And you also need to develop your network. So I will talk about that in December when I say how to source a job with the network. It's something that takes time, so building a network won't happen overnight, but if you're targeting to find a job in Switzerland, you need to start somewhere. So start going to as many events as you can, registering yourself to as many events as you can so you can meet people, exchange cards. Try to basically be out there and show your presence, show that you're here, you're available. It is competitive, I'm not going to lie about that. So the people that will be the most visible and the most present in all these events will be the ones that probably people think about first. And it also shows that you're quite dynamic, you want a job. So you need to do probably a bit more effort than someone who's local, let's say, and has the experience and everything, because you're starting from scratch basically. So it's like everything else, you know, people who already have the network, have been living here their whole life, they have it easy. I mean, let's face it. But basically, it doesn't mean it's impossible as a foreigner. I mean, I'm a foreigner. I was born in France, I'm French, and I have a business in Switzerland, so everything is possible. But I think you just have to take into account that it's work. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, probably more if you start from the beginning. So basically, you have a goal and you want this to happen, so you need to give it 110%. It's basically long hours, you know, searching, being out there on the web and everywhere, showing your face to every event, shaking a lot of hands. You have to be quite dynamic, and but if you have your end goal in mind of what you want, it's worth it in the end if you really want to secure a job as an engineer. So that would be my recommendation. It's to be extremely active as much as you can, to show that you're extremely dynamic, because that's probably your value add with another person, maybe who is in Switzerland, but they take it a bit for granted. Sometimes I've observed this behavior. People who are local because they grew up here, they take it a bit for granted and they're not as motivated. But maybe because you come from another country or you start from scratch and you have to build everything, you're going to be extremely motivated and dynamic, and you can show that in your speech, in how you present yourself. Some personal skills will be important. That's going to make the difference in the end when you meet someone. Are you going to be the type of person people remember meeting, basically? So working on the things that for you would be your speech, how you introduce yourself, making an impact so that people remember you. Okay, I have a question here. Any idea on salary range for IT consultant with 10 years of experience? I don't want to get so much into salaries on this live session, because that really depends on the type of industry, and it can be so different. I don't want to give just a figure out of a hat. I don't think it would be fair. And that's just there's too many different factors to take into account to provide salary. That's something maybe we can talk about offline as an individual type of session, for example, to see really the person, you know, what type of area, what type of industry. I mean, lots of factors to look at. So any more questions before I move forward on what I wanted to cover? So in terms of international organizations, so you have a few multinationals in Switzerland, in the French part and in the German part, that you can look at. But know that right now the international organizations are also potentially moving out of the region. It is quite expensive to do business sometimes, depending on how many people you need to recruit and where you settle. So sometimes multinationals may decide to leave the country or to downsize, etc. So in a job search strategy, I always tell people you can still apply to multinationals, but you also have to look at the smaller businesses, because otherwise you just have a very narrow margin to find a job. So it would be a bit difficult for you. But you do have a few multinational. Mostly you have pharma in Switzerland, where you have a few companies there, Covance, Ferring in Lausanne. You have, for example, Edward Life Sciences, Medtronic, Monsanto, Shire, Stryker. So you have a few that are out there. These are doing quite well. You also have a lot of banks, obviously, in the region to apply. So banks, consumer goods as well, you have a few organizations. Energy and traders, that's quite big also in Geneva. So you just have to see what's available. The job boards will give you an idea of the flavor of basically what's available. So I also wanted to give you, I've just researched last couple of days, what are the provision for 2017 in terms of what kind of areas will be recruiting, because I think, especially if you're a student right now, you're probably thinking, well, what should I study, or what's going to be the type of careers that will exist going on forward. So basically, the places where you could find work potentially in the future, or at least in the upcoming years, from what I've researched and what I know, anything linked to medical, that's actually something that's quite developing, whether it's pharma, being also a practitioner, doctor or nurse, anything with medical assistance. We are going to live longer, but probably meaning we need more medical support, practitioners and medicine. So that, to me, health is definitely a growing field if you're looking at which field is growing. So health, anything linked to food as well. People need to eat and they need to take care of their health. So those are two good fields to get into if you're looking for options. So anything with food is quite important. Also in Switzerland, you have a lot of restaurants, hotels. So people that are cooking or people that do hotel management, there's always a need for those kinds of positions. Real estate is also a field. In Switzerland, you have a lot of homes, a lot of properties that need to be tended and managed. So if you're someone good in sales or in negotiations, probably the real estate and also insurance would be two areas that are going forward, in the upcoming years, where you would be able to find work. I think if you're a good business developer or a good salesperson, you can probably always find something, because in the end, those are really skills that you can transition very easily. So even if you worked many years in insurance or many years in real estate, you can probably say, well, I have the skills, and you can easily transition. It's one of those skills that's easily you can carry with you. Whereas if you're just a finance expert, for example, you can't really work anywhere, do some other kind of jobs. So pharma, as I said, is growing. So that's the clients I have right now, they found positions in pharma. That's why I mention it, because I think these are the organizations that offer opportunities right now. I'm talking about as of end of 2015. So I have a few other questions I wanted to answer as well that I received. I just see one right now from Alexander. Speaking of international organizations, are there any specific points about CERN? Okay, what you mean by specific points? You mean what type of criteria to get in? Is that the way I understand it? Yeah, CERN is an international organization. There's both. There's basically what I would call the standard positions that you can find there, administrative support, and these are open to, I would say, all skills. If you have experience in international organizations, you could apply at CERN just like anywhere else. These would be the general administration jobs, and then you have expert jobs in CERN. And these, you need to have a specific background to apply for them. You just need to look at the job descriptions when you see online to see what type of criteria they're looking for. In engineering, for example, they might be interested. You just have to see what they present there and what they're requesting. But again, it's a big organization, so you're going to have to go through the motions of the application process, which will take time. And again, it's competitive, so that's why I was saying earlier to really be present and meet people in person, even in different types of structures that are not as big. Because sometimes people think about the big names. They think about the UN, about the Red Cross and CERN, because they're known worldwide and they do hire worldwide as well. However, because they're so competitive to get into, you're probably going to take a longer time to get in. Whereas if you were to look at smaller NGOs, maybe that are not as public because they can't afford, or they don't have the website properly put together where you can find the jobs online. But that's by tapping what I call the hidden market, where you actually identify these smaller organizations and you can introduce your services to them. So that would be what I call the back door, which probably will get more efficient you would be more efficient at doing this. So just quickly to talk about job seeker checklist, what I call it. So in the job seeker checklist, understand quickly where there's a market for you. That would be the first thing in my view that would be important. So is there a market if you're, I don't know, if you're an engineer, as you say, do you have a market for your services? If you're in marketing, what type of organization? So that would be step number one. Step number two is check whether you will have a work permit issue. We discussed it a little bit earlier. Definitely international organizations, depending on how they're set up, may or may not hire globally. Some of them do not have the immunities and privileges, so they have to hire people that are already with a work permit. And these tend to be obviously the smaller organizations, but you have to check. It depends. Make sure you have a great resume and cover letter. I cannot say this enough. People sometimes take it a little bit lightly or may not have taken the time to research to find out the cover letter for Switzerland and the CV. I will talk about it in a minute. Have a diverse strategy on the job search. That's why I was saying earlier, just having one thing where you would just, let's say, apply for one specific kind of organization is not enough. You also need to look at other types of organizations. Also increase geographically, even if you do prefer a specific area. I always tell people, go as big as you can from the beginning and then narrow down. It's easier that way. And also take a services provider approach rather than a job applicant. I think mentally it's a little bit of a different thing. If you're saying I'm sending my resume out and I'm waiting to hear back, you're already in a passive situation. If you're going to an event to introduce yourself as a person, you're already more active. So it's all about how you introduce your services, how you introduce yourself. It's going to make the difference as well. And I think I said this before, as an employer, I prefer someone who will contact me and say, I like your business, I like what you stand for, I'm interested in what you do and talking to you a bit more. I'm much more interested in meeting this kind of a person than someone who just replies to an ad that I put online and I don't know if they're motivated by the business or if they just want a job. And it's, again, it's a little bit different. So, and you will hear probably by speaking, if you speak with people in Switzerland, probably most of them, they found a job by somebody who talked to somebody who made them aware of a job opening somewhere, and it works a little bit like this. It also works where people tend to recruit in the same industry. So for example, if I'm a marketing person for fast-moving goods, probably I have my network in that area, and my chances career-wise would be to probably continue in the same direction with other companies and just basically get phone calls for these kinds of jobs. So that's also something to take into account. It's that it's very much in silos. So people who are in international organizations tend to rotate in these. People who are in banks tend to rotate in banks. So in terms of career potential, the pathways to cross are not necessarily there. It is possible in some instances. For example, if you're in finance or maybe positions that are a bit more that you could do in different places, you may be able to switch. But I would say even then, it's probably not guaranteed. So these bridges are not necessarily there. So you need to be aware. That's why I spend a lot of time on the career goal with my clients, because I want them to pick something they really like. Especially if they're going to stay a while in Switzerland, because you can't really change that much. So once you pick something, you have to stick to it at least for a long time, because 3 years later, you won't be able to say, oh, now I think I want international organizations, or now I think I want pharma. The changes are not so easy to make once you start somewhere. So that's something cultural also to know in terms of picking a career. I have other questions I just wanted to answer as well from Antonia before I forget. So Antonia said, what is the value of an MBA on the Swiss market? So that's a very good question. So the value of an MBA really depends on what you want to make out of it. I see so many people who go for master's degree, even PhD, and then they just stop. They just either stick with something very basic, or even they don't work anymore. I just find it's a pity. If I look at my graduation for my master's, probably, except for a few people who have build their career and really pursue something. I would say probably half of them now don't even do what they were trained to do. So it's a pity, I think. If you're going to do a master's, make sure you have a plan behind it. So it's okay, I want to do an MBA because I want to secure a leadership position in a big organizations, or because I want to target these kinds of jobs in my current organization, but not because you just want the letters on your resume. I think too many people now just go for the letters, MBA, and then it doesn't really mean anything. Everyone now has an MBA almost, and what's going to make the difference between you and another person? Maybe the school, yes, or maybe not. So if you target specific organizations, for example, I would say consulting or big names out there, big multinationals, probably it's a prestige thing. If you go to certain schools and you have an MBA from, IMD, if I take the example, it looks good on your resume and you probably make a better impact with clients as well. So for the prestigious type of names, it could be a plus. If it's your career goal, if you're telling me I want to work for a prestigious multinational or consulting firm, I would say, yeah, it's going to be an ad. But if you're saying, yeah, I just want to get more experience, maybe move forward in my career, there's probably other things you could do that would lead you to the same results. There's a lot of online training right now that's not so expensive that I find even from big schools. That could give you the skills that you need. For example, if you need negotiation or personal skills, or maybe a bit of math, or there's a lot of online training you can find very cheap, and it's usually shorter as well. So if you need to have a job fairly quickly, or you want to move a bit quicker than the masters, there's lots of training that didn't even exist when I did my masters. I did my masters in 2010, so 6 years ago. And it just wasn't there. If I wanted to get those kinds of classes, I had to go for a formal program. I don't even want to talk about when I did my bachelor's, there was nothing there. It was just the beginning of internet. But now if you can get so much free or cheap, I wouldn't necessarily spend the money. So that's what I mean. Now I have a question for Nadine. Do internships taken in Switzerland look like basically are looked at seriously or not? That's basically the question. Or do they show as a weakness that you're not able to find paid work? I think that it's really, again, depending on your career goal. If you're, for example, to work in international organizations, technically you start with an internship. Also, I would say similar with multinationals, they want to see that you're trained to do the work. And when you're young, it's probably now a necessary step. You can't really now get paid work immediately after graduation. You have this stage, which has grown in my view. When I did my degree, one internship was enough to secure a job. Now you have to do at least 6 or 7, and that's probably the minimum. It's really sad, but the market right now tends to accumulate internships. And I would say you just need to get enough experience that you're credible. So at some point, it's okay to do an internship when you graduate or when you don't have experience, because you need to show that you're motivated and you're developing your skills. But at some point, you need to be taken seriously. So if you have done a good internship, couple of internships, and you feel comfortable with your skills, you should be credible enough to secure a paid job. But sometimes people are never secure, and that's another issue. Sometimes I have people after the 6th internship, they tell me, I don't know, I'm not sure. Can I really go for this job? But I don't know this software, or I don't know this. So you're doing it also to yourself. Sometimes it's the lack of, it's not so much the lack of credibility, but it's the lack of self-esteem or self-awareness. And that's another topic which I could do a whole live Facebook on, but I think probably also the self-awareness and the self-esteem would help your job search. So if you feel confident about your stuff and you know what you're talking about, people will believe you. If you don't, then people don't believe you. I've taken a lot of singing and acting courses just because I thought it was good for developing your personal presence and all these things. The first thing you learn from the teacher is that if you're not confident in what you're saying, it's not going to come across well. So that's what you learn in those kinds of classes. So I always advise people to take public speaking courses or singing courses or acting courses, because you will learn how to deal with nervousness, about being credible when you speak. All these kinds of things would really help you, and it would really help you the day of the interview, when you're speaking to someone, etc., etc. So that would be my recommendations for internship, is to keep it to a reasonable amount, but don't go overboard with it, because at some point you do need to get a real job, so to say, or a paid job. Then I have a question from Gaurav, who says about the non-EU work opportunities. How difficult is that when you don't have this EU nationality or you're not already in Switzerland? I was talking a little bit earlier about that when I was talking about somebody who asked me about the IT profession. It's true that nowadays there is limitations in terms of permits. So if you come from a non-EU country, you're not going to get necessarily a job as easily. But it's all a question about your potential as an individual. So if you're coming to work for a startup, for example, and you have a huge value that you're bringing, maybe you can develop the business somewhere, or you have skills that are really in demand, you can probably convince somebody to do a permit for you, and there's always ways around it. But it takes time and it takes convincing, etc. But you need to be really good, basically. And it's the same everywhere. It's the same on the other side of the fence. If you go to the US or Canada, probably you can get a permit, but you need to be very good. You need to have education, you need to be credible, you need to have experience. So the more you know and the more you're an expert in a field, the better the permit situation will clear up. But if you're just starting out and you're just the same as everybody else, I would say, and you don't have a specific specialty, it would be more difficult to convince someone to make a permit for you, because if you're an assistant, for example, and you have dozens of assistants already and they speak 4 languages, it's going to be a harder sale, which you can understand. So you have to work on the value add that you would bring to Switzerland, and that's going to be the start of it. What value do I have? Which specific skill? And if you don't have it yet, develop it. Become a specialist in something. You know, take the time to build up your expertise, your knowledge, and then you can position yourself better on the market. That's the way I would go about it. It's much easier, and you would at some point find something. So that was my question from Gaurav. So just a few words on the Swiss application, because I think it's important. How do you go about your Swiss application? If, let's say, right now you're targeting some positions, you know, what do you need to do? Well, the first thing is that you need a Swiss-style resume. So what I mean by a Swiss-style resume, I mean you need to have specific things on it. So those things would include, for example, your photo on top, a clear header that says what it is that you do. I've worked in human resources many years, and we just don't have time. I didn't have time to really figure out who you are and what you do and what you deliver. I would need to quickly see, okay, what's your profile? What can you do for me, or for the organization, basically? So make sure that you're very clear on what you're looking for. And that's usually the part that's the most problematic when I work with clients, is their goal, their career goal. It's not so much about the resume itself, it's what's your career goal, what are you looking for? And once you figure that out, then everything else will just be built around that. So for example, if you say, it's the same in your life, if you say tomorrow I want to live in Paris and I want to build a life there, okay, that's your goal. So then you're going to make steps towards that. Well, I need to maybe buy or rent a flat there, I need to find a job there, etc., to reach to that goal. So it's the same thing with a resume. It's if you want to become an engineer in Switzerland, what do I need to do? What are the steps I need to make that happen? Well, I need to build my network, so that means I need to be extra active. I need potentially to learn a few languages or one. I need to become an expert in one field in IT so that I'm known as this expert. So those would be the type of discussions we would have together to increase your market potential. So in terms of application, you need a Swiss-style resume, a good letter of motivation. So that's not something that says, hi, I've seen your, and unfortunately I see these letters all the time. Hi, I've seen your, you have a job ad, I'm applying. And by the way, I've done this and that, thank you, and hope to see you soon. This is just the average letter everyone sends, so you need to put a little more effort to it. You know, why this organization? What are they doing that attracted you to apply? You know, what's the potential for you in terms of career development? All these kinds of things. And then you would build on that, you know, in your letter. So I spend a lot of time also on letter of motivation. Your work certificates. So if you don't have any because you're new, you're an expat, make sure that you get some kind of letters of recommendations from past employers. So If you worked in specific industry, you can always call your ex-employers to have them do a little letter for you that will always help you. So in Switzerland, it's very much a market of trust. So people tend to recruit people that they feel comfortable with. So if you've worked a long time with an organization, that signifies trust. If you are referred by someone, that's also a trust, because, oh, okay, she knows this person, so it's secure. So they will probably be more likely to talk to you. So anything that reaffirms that, if you have a lot of letters of recommendation, that shows trust as well. People have worked with you and appreciate it, so it's a good sign. But if you just send an empty application, there's no letters of recommendations, you don't have work certificates, you're an unknown entity for a recruiter and you're a risk, basically. And risk in Switzerland is not something that people are very comfortable with. Recruitment is also very expensive, so you can't really afford to get it wrong. And I think on both sides, even for the employee, it's not really fun to be let go after a couple of months. It can be quite expensive to settle somewhere and to have to leave. So I think on both ends, it's important to make sure that the move is something that is worth it, or the contract. So strategies for newcomers. Someone asked me what should be the strategies when you have no experience, no network. So the first thing you need to do is build up your experience. So take really everything that builds up your experience, even volunteer work, if you can afford it for a while. Volunteer work is a way to show that you have some kind of motivation to improve in your area and to learn. I just talked to somebody who managed an event completely on a volunteer basis, and you know, it's something she really learned a lot from, and she can sell that now in a paid position. So look at every opportunity as a way to learn. So even if it's just volunteering to greet people at the door in an event, or there's always people asking for support. You know, it could be on the Expat's websites, you know, they say we need someone who can do some translation, or we need someone who can do, you know, a few things. So always take this opportunity. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I don't think people have this necessarily this automatic way of saying, what could I do as a person to keep myself busy without having an employer? Because I think we're still pretty much born or raised to do a job for a company. I mean, the way we go to school is that we learn to do specific tasks. So try to think a little bit about what could you do with yourself without an employer. I know that sounds a bit difficult, but it's basically to sell your services direct. You have a lot of websites now, especially in Switzerland, just like everywhere else, where you can sell your services. So you can actually do, you know, if you're a teacher, you know, teach kids. If you're if you can do a bit of renovation work for houses, you know, just propose your services. You don't necessarily have to create a company to do that. Now you have a lot of platforms where you can do services, you know, get paid via the website. It doesn't really necessarily take a company unless you want to make it your career. But if you're just looking for something that gets you experience, just propose your services via a platform. Now with apps, you can do that easily, and it keeps you busy and it makes you meet people. So I don't think people are quite trained on that end yet. We're still very much in the industrial way of thinking, where you have a company with people at a desk that are doing work, you know, widgets. If you want to learn about this, I don't want to get into it because I'm passionate about the topic, but someone named Seth Godin, who is a thinker and a writer, is talking a lot about this change we're going through, which is the transition to the 21st century. So if you're curious about where the world is going towards, what kind of skills will be needed, definitely read Seth Godin. He basically tells you everything you need to know. And once you read him, you can understand what you need to do to find a job or to even find a career. So definitely leave this whole mindset about work in a factory or company, but more think about what skills do I have that would be useful to somebody, and how can I make that happen? And it doesn't have to be via a company. Again, the platforms now let you sell your services easily, and you just need to find what you're good at. That's the bottom line. What are you good at? What is your thing? And once you figure that out, you can sell it in many different forms. So I see a question from Jamila. Hello, is it a basic course or those who didn't work for a little while? Is there a basic course? I'm not sure I understand the question there. Is it a basic course or those who didn't work for a while? Oh, you mean if you want to return to work? That's the way I understand the question. It's going to be the same thing as someone who needs to enter the work. So whether you're trying to enter, you're a new young graduate, or you're an expat, or you're returning to work, it's always the same really hard push you have to give. So you're starting from scratch basically, so you have to build up your name, build up your knowledge, and really try to extend to as many people as you can, so that they can hear you, know you exist. That's the big challenge in the noise that we have everywhere now. And then if you give enough credibility and people say, yeah, you know what, this person sounds right, then they might talk to someone about you, and then they may say, hey, you know, I know this person who's doing this thing. So it's all about really now branding your name. That's going to be important. Examples of platforms where we can offer jobs. So those kinds of platforms that I'm thinking about, you have a lot of, well, it's called freelancing, but you don't necessarily need at the beginning to have, again, a freelance status, but you can sell your services via something called, I believe it's called WeWork or something like that, or you know, you just have to Google freelancer platforms, and I'm sure you can find loads of platforms where you can register. And basically, I wouldn't worry so much about, again, the credential, because it's basically how good you will be and your clients will rate you. So, so it's basically how good you are in your job. And if you're very good, people will work with you again. So it doesn't necessarily, again, it's easy. You don't have to create a company. You can just sell your services online. You just have to find those platforms by Googling freelance jobs, or now you have also a lot of possibilities to be a nanny, or again, to propose your services via websites. So you just have to search a little bit on the web to see, you know, in Switzerland where you could find those kinds of opportunities. I'm trying to see here. What are the top 3 expat sites, please? Okay, so the top 3 expat sites I would look at, you have Glocals. I believe it's .com, Glocals, Glocals, Glocals.com. There you can find also people who propose their services to help translation, you know, renovation work, nanny, etc. So Glocals is one, a big website. The other one, for expats, you have, well, I think meetup.com is interesting if you look at Switzerland, because you can find also a lot of events to go to if you're an expat and you're new in town, type of thing. And then you have Internations. Internations, I believe it's .org, where you also have a lot of things happening in Switzerland, a lot of events. And I think on the wire, you can also post that you can offer your services, but you have to be careful also with their policies and everything. But you can also post some ads there. And then there's this other one. I just need to think of the name. Anibis.ch, ANIBIS.ch. You can post, of course, you can sell things, but you can also post your services if you want to offer, for example, language courses or nanny or things like that. You mentioned before there are those reasonably priced online courses. Are there any trustworthy providers you would recommend, or are there plenty of scams? So that's from Jan. Thanks for the question. You have a lot of reputable ones. Coursera is one of them. I use them. Coursera for online things. You have Udemy as well. Udemy is known worldwide and it's quite serious. I've taken a few classes online there. Because I wanted just to brush up on a few things, not on personal branding. For example, I took a course by Gary V, who's quite known for his production work. Basically, he's doing a lot of videos and he's very good at communications. So I followed this course online. So Udemy is quite reputable, and I can think of a few other ones also I can post in the next days on my page on Facebook. Just trying from the top of my head, just Udemy and Coursera come to mind, but there's also a few other ones. And they're reasonably priced. What I mean by reasonably priced, you know, it's an online course, and you get a few materials there that you can download. And it's not hundreds of thousands as you would get in a master's degree. But again, it depends on your career objective, as I was saying. If you target those prestigious organizations, they will want to have people that graduated from these schools. But if you're just looking to develop your skills for other purposes, sometimes it can fit your goal. It can be just as good. And I think it's a good start anyways. Before investing in the big degree, that's part of my perspective. I wrote a book that's going to be available, by the way, in the next months. In my book, basically, I'm going through a process for people to find their dream job. And what I say by that is to really test options. So it's much less investment if you're not sure yet what you want to do, to take a few online courses in the topic. Let's say you decide it's not for you, it only costs you a couple €100 or 100 francs, rather than going to go for a master's and realize I just spent, 10,000 Swiss francs for nothing. So I think it's a good option there to learn and to keep learning. And I think it's going to be more and more online training courses anyways, and some of them also have a graduation. Basically, they give you a certificate, so it's also something that's a plus, if you want to put on your resume. Okay, so just moving straight through to my other topics on the topic of finding a job. I see a question from Alexander. Recruiting agencies, is it an effective strategy to use their services to find a first job for an engineer no experience? Okay, so it's part of the job search strategy, basically. So a strategy for me, and it's valid for anything, is like you don't have just one path. So meaning you're not just looking at job boards, or you're not just looking at agencies, you're doing a bit of everything. So you will definitely answer jobs in a job board. You will definitely try to find opportunities in the hidden market by calling people or emailing people directly. And agencies could be a partner for you. The problem is with agencies is that they work for clients that have very specific requirements. So when you send your resume, they may not know what to do with it unless they have an actual position to fit. So the agencies are great if you found a job and you're sending your resume via this job opening, then they would probably look at it. But if you just send it just like that, they may not know what to do with it, so they will keep it, but it's not an immediate connection. So it's part of your job search strategy. You need to have a few agencies you are in contact with that know you're out there, but it's just part of it. So yes, it's helpful, but it's only part of it. What are the top criteria interviewers look at during an interview that are culturally specific? Okay, well, there's no real thing they would look at that's culturally specific. They might just ask you, I know it happened to me one time a few years back, when people say, well, do you live in Geneva? What do you know about Geneva? So people might ask a little bit how much you know about the local environment. So if you don't live in the area where you work, and I'm thinking about the frontalier basically, because I will talk about it in a minute, then people might say you just come here to get a job, to get a salary, but you actually don't live here, you're not included in the local community. So I think showing that you're involved, what I was saying earlier, in the local community is always a plus. They may ask you, well, do you live close by? I see on your resume, etc. So that's the type of thing they may ask you. Or it could be in the conversation also, where they say, oh, did you go to this event that happened here a few weeks back? So it's part of the small talk. I think if you're in the local community, you understand the big events happening, just the local practices, things like that. So it makes you feel like you're part of something, and people will be more inclined to talk to you or to prefer you in terms of candidate than someone who's just coming for the salary or the job. So it's a little bit part of what I call emotional intelligence. It's understanding what type of thing people will be looking for in an interview. Okay, that was the last question. So quickly about Pleiades HC. I don't know if all of you are actually signed up on my Facebook page or how you got to this event. I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you're here today. So Pleiades HC, it's my consulting organization. I created it in 2015. I have a background in human resources where I worked my entire career. And in 2015, I really wanted to work closely with individuals. That's my thing, to really help them find the job that they love and that they would grow in. So I worked for consulting firms as well in helping people to find a job. And basically where I work is really much individually. So I have basically one-to-one sessions that people can work with me to tap their particular issues. So today it's very much a big presentation for everybody. So when I work one-to-one, it's on your particular issues, which is obviously interesting. And then I have an online career pack where people learn basically how to look for a job in Switzerland with the different steps. So how to brand yourself, how to go to the market, and then how to secure the job. So there is an actual logical process to go about it. And I also give you a lot of information and a lot of resources. So links and contacts and online resources, where it's going to be a huge booster for you rather than to be by yourself trying to figure things out on your own. So that's the other thing. And then what I do is also I offer a lot of events like today. I'm trying to be more public, to talk more about career, but also it's more than career. It's going to economy. How to be prepared for the economy of tomorrow. That's my personal vision and my personal goal. I mean, for me, the job search and the career is quite important, but my bigger mission is really to make people more independent and more autonomous in a world where I think we're a bit stuck sometimes with an employer and with not many options to deal with. So I'm trying to give people their freedom back, to say you have a choice. And it's not only one choice, which is to find an employer and work for them. It's also to think a little bit outside the box, what you could do with your skills and how you can be free of all the drama around looking for a job for an employer. So it takes a little bit of a mindset, and that's also what I'm working with, but really making people more autonomous is my goal as an individual. So that's what I do with my clients, is really make them feel that they have choices, that they can sell their skills, and they don't necessarily need to beg for a job, which is not necessarily a pleasant thing for anybody. And I wrote a book, which is going to be available in a couple of weeks, where I explain also how to find your dream job, because searching for a job is one thing when you know what you're looking for, but if you don't, it's this big blurry scene where you're like, I have no clue where to start. So you need to have some tools also to help you work through the process. It's like, okay, I go from here to really finding what I'm meant to do in this world. You know, what is the right career for me? And that's where it starts. So if you don't have that, I think it's going to be hard to find the right job. So that's why I wanted to create this book, so that people can work on it when they have some time and really find that goal, that career goal. And then everything else will be much easier, I find. So that's for the book, available in a couple of weeks. Before I move to the frontalier status, any other questions? So I've answered from Olga the criteria to look at during interviews. I don't see anything else. So frontalier status is something very particular. It's basically working in a country and living in another country. So that means, and I want to mention the fact that it is complex, because sometimes people find that it could be a great idea, but in the end it can bring also complexity to your life. And depending on where you stand in terms of permit and nationality, it can be even more complex. So I just wanted to give you a few pointers of things that you need to look at, potentially discuss with your partner if you're in a relationship, because it's, again, it's bringing complexity. So the first one is the mandatory work permit. If you live in another country, you're not going to get the Swiss permits. You're going to get a G permit, which is someone who lives in the border, or actually with frontalier, you can live even further than that. But it's basically where you come to work and you go home. So the problem with this permit, in my view, is that it's only good as long as you have a job in a company. So let's say your employer doesn't need your services anymore, boom, permit goes, you know, and you're back to your hometown, you know, in your country. So it's very much a permit that has limits in terms of your long-term career potential in a country. So the frontalier permit is great because I think for some people, they want to build a life in another country because they can afford more. But in the end, you know, the permit thing will be a problem. The other thing is also about what you get, you know, in terms of pension and allocations for your children. it's also different. So once you live in a country and you work in another one, the whole benefits is going to change. So you won't get the same kind of child allocation, for example. So that means support to help you raise your kids. The health insurance also becomes an issue because you're in another country. So in France, for example, they completely eliminated the private insurance. So you have to pay into the national insurance for the same price as the private insurance. So in a way you would say, well, you know, it's not great, but it is good insurance, but it's just you're paying huge fees for it. And it's something you're going to have to choose, and you only choose one time, so you have to be sure of yourself. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. If you're a foreigner, you have a permit that's going to be only linked to your employer, meaning very, very much fragile in terms of long term. You will have all these things to pay for that you may not have thought about, you know, insurance. You have to drive, obviously, so that means a lot of back and forth and so forth. So it's quite complicated there. And you also have tax issues. So what I was saying earlier with the canton, so every canton is different. So that means you can't say, okay, you know, this is it. It's this way in Switzerland. And this is the amount of tax I'm going to pay. Depending on where you live, taxation varies tremendously. So a job offer that may sound good may not be as exciting, because once you make your calculations with the local tax that's applied, then you might realize, oops, it's not as great as I thought. So you just need to think about those things, you know, where you will live, what's the taxation like, and is it really good to be frontalier for that matter. So I would really encourage you to do this preparation work, is to understand where do you want to live, what is the local flavor like, what's the taxation like, and is it really worth to do the whole frontalier thing. If you're going to live in France, for example, which most people, that's the closest country, so that's where they would live. With the Swiss German, it could be Germany as well. So you just have to think of those things and whether it's really worth it. And also understanding that your permit is as good as your employer keeps you. So that makes it also a little bit fragile long term. So I think I'm getting to the point now where I've said everything that was important in terms of job search, big topics. So before we part, any other questions? So I think this is not the end of it. Obviously, if you can think of some other questions, I will be checking my Facebook page later today to see if there are other questions and answer them at this stage. You're welcome also to check my website and see if you have additional things you want to talk maybe more on a one-to-one basis, because again, I'm trying to be as I try to give as many targeted answers as I can, but every person's situation is different, and you know, with the permit and the options and all that. So it was very nice to talk to you online and to meet you online. But I really enjoyed doing this live presentation, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming one in December, which is about how to secure a job using your network. So that's when I will get more into networking and how you go about that, how you build it, etc. Okay, Sovan has 2 questions for me. Any tips for application follow-ups? I just received the standard automatic response after 3 or 4 weeks. Any good reference for CVs? And customized material, basically. So yeah, for follow-ups, basically I always tell people to wait 3 or 4 weeks, because that's the time it would take to receive all the applications and to make decisions. It really depends how much details you have on the application. So if it's something you found via an automated system, typically you just send it through and you don't really know who's recruiting. You could always try to find by looking on LinkedIn, for example, and see. But usually in big companies, they may have 5 or 6 people doing resourcing, recruitment. So to try to find that person would be difficult. And on top of that, for a multinational, probably you won't get through via telephone, and it would be hard to get the email as well. So I would say with big companies, the follow-up is going to be more difficult. Now, if it's an agency where you have a name, usually they put their name, it's easier to do the follow-up, because then you can call the person or email them for follow-up. So try to see when you apply, if you're given this name of the person. It's also cultural. Some companies tend to share that with people, and they don't mind that you follow up, and other companies are very private, they don't want any follow-up. So if you have the chance to have the name, at least an email, you know, I would say make sure you do this, you follow up. And for references, for CVs and customers letters, there's lots on Word. If you go on Word and you see cover letters, resumes, you have lots of templates. Then you have to find one that suits your personality as well, you know, with the elements I was saying earlier. Make sure that you have your photo, recent photo, good quality. Make sure that it's clear. Again, it's all about communication. So the template is one thing, but is it articulated in a way that people can read it and understand it? Some people are not very qualified with writing, you know, that's okay. Everyone has their skills, especially if you're a technical person, you know, in IT or engineering, maybe writing is not your thing. And that's when it might be a good idea to have it done by somebody else who understands your field, or at least understands what you're trying to do, and then, you know, can write it for you in clear terms. That's as important as the template itself. I'm just trying to read. Okay. So that was the last question, I believe, from Sylvan. Very interesting one. So now it's going to be a bit of a slower time. We're hitting end of November, I think for December, beginning of January. So what I would recommend is really to prepare yourself right now. It's the time when you can think about your career goal, think about where your potential future employers may be, which parts of Switzerland, which parts of sectors and industries, and plan for 2017. You know, what's my best market? Where would I find the most information? What type of website should I be looking at? All these different things to prepare you for when the market will be ready to hire again in 2017. Okay, well, I shall go now. Again, very happy to talk to you. This will be available for replay on Facebook. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.